SMS Zaqy Mohamad.
Mr. Speaker, the speeches by members of this House have allowed us to reflect on our nation's fight against COVID-19 and the lessons to prepare us for the next pandemic. It was slightly more than 3 years ago when we first heard about a cluster of severe pneumonia cases in Wuhan, China, and no one could have imagined the prolonged impact that this would have had on the world, on the society, and our economy. Being in MND and MOM at the onset of the pandemic, I witnessed how sectors like construction face the risk of collapse if we didn't intervene early to address disruptions to supply and foreign manpower and business distress due to the pandemic and global border control measures. I also vividly remember Prime Minister Lee's speech on our commitment to our migrant workers for their role in building Singapore over the years. It was a powerful one. Our migrant workers will be paid their salaries and that we will provide medical care and treatment that they need. It was a bold and inclusive commitment that resonated very much and appreciated by the workers. And you may recall seeing many videos of thanks from our migrant workers on social media then. And during my rounds visiting the dormitories and in meetings, the high commissioners and the ambassadors from our migrant workers' home countries conveyed their nation's appreciation for our efforts. Our swift actions and commitment showed Singapore to be a reliable and trusted partner. Our migrant workers play an important role in building and maintaining Singapore's infrastructure, and I would like to reiterate our appreciation for all their contributions to Singapore and their trust, patience, and understanding during the pandemic as we worked to keep them safe during COVID-19 and manage the evolving situation. Through this journey, we all learned to be adaptable and resilient in overcoming the challenges before us. We rallied together, our people, the public service, private companies, and civil society, to put the interests of our nation and others before our own, and came through as one united people. In my speech, I will elaborate on managing the impact of COVID-19 on the construction industry, standing up emergency accommodation facilities for migrant workers and supporting their health and well-being, ensuring that the SAF maintain the high level of operational readiness and adapting to adjustments to religious life by the Malay-Muslim community. Mr. Speaker, our built environment sector was one of the worst hit sectors by the pandemic. Almost all construction work came to a halt during the circuit breaker period. Even after work resumed and the dormitories declared cleared of COVID-19, companies had to adjust their operations and adapt to new measures, such as safe management measures at work sites. Companies faced manpower shortages as they were unable to bring in new migrant workers due to travel restrictions and border measures. And these led to project delays and significant cost increases to the sector. Given the unprecedented challenges faced by the built environment sector, the government intervened in a significant way. We introduced a $1.36 billion construction support package to help companies ease back into work safely after the circuit breaker period. And this came on top of the general support measures for all sectors. We also provided companies with multiple rounds of foreign worker levy rebates and waivers, as well as wage subsidies via the job support scheme. And this relieved some of the burden from manpower costs and helped preserve jobs in the sector, including for locals. We recognize that some companies would be unable to meet their contractual obligations and previously committed timelines with the work stoppages and delays due to COVID-19. As such, we introduced the COVID-19 Temporary Measures Act, or COTMA, provisions to provide relief for defaulting parties by putting in place a moratorium, during which legal obligations relating to inability to perform contractual obligations due to COVID-19 could not be enforced. Now, the COTMA also provided a defense against claims for contract breaches, including liquidated damages in such instances. A universal extension of time of 4 months was granted for construction projects to account for the circuit breaker and time taken to clear the dormitories. We also recognize the need to ensure that no single party in the built environment value chain bore a disproportionate cost burden arising from delays due to the pandemic. Hence, we inserted provisions in the COTMA to facilitate equitable sharing of non-manpower prolongation costs and foreign manpower cost increases between project parties. We also supported developers and end users such as home buyers. Developers whose projects face construction delays could seek relief on the date of delivery of possession. Home buyers who were affected by extended delivery dates could similarly seek reimbursement from the developer for qualifying expenses. Our trade associations also played a pivotal role in addressing the acute manpower shortages. The Singapore Contractors Association Limited, or SCAL, Association of Singapore Marine Industries, ASME, and Association of Process Industry, ASPRI, took the lead to pilot a tightened end-to-end process to bring migrant workers into Singapore safely. This initiative involved integrating the testing of workers at dedicated onboarding facilities in their home countries with protocols for them to stay safe from infection. And I thank SCAL, ASME, and ASPRI for their Herculean effort in coordinating across multiple local and foreign companies in the healthcare and hospitality sectors and working closely with various public sector agencies to facilitate the safe inflow of foreign workers. The pilot's success allowed us to scale up further to meet the manpower needs of the construction, marine, and process industries while safeguarding public health and our healthcare capacity. The lessons learned and experience gained from these initiatives will help to minimize future manpower disruptions in the next pandemic. Today, our construction activities are now close to pre-COVID levels, and firm formation and cessation numbers also point to a stable situation. So I thank our trade associations and all members of the built environment sector for their understanding, support, and resilience, which has made this recovery possible. The strong partnerships that we have forged over the past 3 years and the can-do spirit to overcome challenges will go a long way in preparing us for the next pandemic. Ultimately, what COVID-19 has taught us is that we need to transform the built environment sector towards greater resilience and productivity. The Minister for Manpower had elaborated on the fight against COVID-19 in the dormitories yesterday and areas where we could do better. To protect our migrant workers and reduce COVID-19 transmission within the dormitories, we brought together public agencies, private companies, and NGOs to identify and stand up emergency accommodation facilities. Put together, they came up with an adaptable and innovative solutions, often under tight timelines and resource constraints. We repurposed a wide range of facilities into safe emergency accommodation facilities, and these included cruise ships, flotels, hotels, as well as retrofitted state properties such as multi-story car parks, vacant schools, and vacant HDB blocks. We also used port land and exhibition spaces such as the Tanjung Pagar Port and Singapore Expo. We even used a vacant en-bloc site, the former Chancery Court condominium offered by Far East Organization. And moving on to another group of partners, I'll always be thankful for the support from our NGOs in providing care and support for our migrant workers throughout the pandemic. I recall our many meetings and dormitory visits during the pandemic where I felt heartened by their tireless efforts, especially during circuit breaker. They came together to forge new partnerships and coordinated efforts on the ground to meet the needs of our migrant workers in different ways. The Migrant Workers Center, for example, quickly kick-started initiatives to distribute masks, hand sanitizers, soap bars, shampoos, dental kits, and other essential items to all migrant workers in the dormitories, including those in the smaller factory-converted dorms and construction temporary quarters, or CTQs. We also had medical volunteers from NGO HealthServe who helped to supplement the efforts of our medical teams on the ground. As an interracial, interreligious, and intercultural organization, Hope Initiative Alliance, or HIA, played an important role in ensuring that the spiritual needs of our workers were met. They organized congregational prayers and religious services for workers of different faiths in the dormitories and recreation centers. When workers were unable to return home during their festive holidays, HIA helped to spread cheer by distributing festive care packs and meals, And while many of the volunteers came from Christian groups, I remember them coming at 4 a.m. in the morning to deliver breakfast during Ramadan. And this was at the height of the pandemic in 2020. If I had to share all our stories together on the ground, we could be here for quite a while. So just let me acknowledge our other NGOs who had made a difference in the lives of our migrant workers and helped as sounding boards for some of our policies. And these include the development of the improved dormitory standards over the last 3 years. So thank you, COVID-19 Migrant Support Coalition, or CMSC, Crisis Relief Alliance, CRA, Humanitarian Organization for Migrant Economics, HOME, It's Reading Raincoats, IRR, My Brother SG, and the Salvation Army for all your support. Ms. Rachel Ong spoke about how we should continue our close working relationships with the NGOs to sustain the outreach within the migrant worker community. The Alliance for Migrant Worker Support, AMWS, was initially set up as an engagement platform with our NGOs during COVID-19. Moving forward, the AMWS will continue to be an important platform for us to come together to discuss how we can better support our migrant workers, work to improve policies affecting them, as well as to build our capabilities to better coordinate the distribution of resources and respond quickly in the next pandemic. The Minister for Manpower spoke yesterday on how the government stood up the interagency task force and brought in the SAF and Home team to manage the COVID-19 situation in the dormitories. Despite the risks involved, we saw the unwavering dedication of these officers, including those deployed as part of the forward assurance and support teams, what we know as FAST. Allow me to share two inspiring examples. SPF officer Station Inspector Sheikh Ismail volunteered as a FAST officer at the S11 dormitory at Punggol. We saw the largest COVID-19 cluster. Station Inspector Sheikh made sure that the workers' needs were met, helping them to talk to their employers about their salaries, ensuring that they stayed connected with their families, and assisting them to remit money back home. What struck me was that SI Sheikh went beyond the call of duty to lend a listening ear, taking the time to understand their fears and encouraging them to focus on their hopes and dreams. Corporal NS Vinod, a combat medic with the 2nd Combat Support Hospital, was deployed to the Expo Community Care Facility. He supported the operations to plan, monitor, and deliver care to affected migrant workers. He shared that his ICT had been the most meaningful one for him. He felt a strong commitment to fight a different kind of war in a hall filled with thousands of migrant workers in COVID-19. Against an enemy that threatened to instill fear and destroy our way of life, Singaporeans from all walks of life, the public service, the private sector, NGOs, volunteers, and national servicemen have indeed come together to fight a different kind of war, each playing their part through total defense. One of the key lessons from the pandemic is the importance of the adaptability and resilience of our infrastructure. The unprecedented scale and prolonged nature of COVID-19 pandemic resulted in overwhelming demand for quarantine housing and temporary accommodations. Learning from this experience, public sector agencies are working to identify suitable facilities to meet possible crisis scenarios and better safeguard and operationalize sites for emergency needs. And this includes exploring dual-use facilities to serve both peacetime and crisis functions. One way to do this is by retrofitting available and suitable state properties to be able to pivot from peacetime to crisis use when necessary. An example is a quick-build dormitory at Sengkang West. It is currently used for new migrant workers to undergo residential onboarding and medical examination when they first arrive in Singapore. In the event of a pandemic, the onboard center can be quickly converted into a dedicated facility for newly arrived workers to serve their stay-home notice. Public sector agencies will also explore with private sector owners to potentially use a wide variety of private infrastructure for emergency housing. And these include chalets, hotels, service apartments, and exhibition spaces. And one such example was how the resort at Downtown East was used as a government quarantine facility. The 2 new migrant worker dormitories that MOM will be operating in partnership with the private sector will have enhanced livability and adaptability features for both peacetime and future disease outbreaks. For example, there will be larger recreation spaces such as multipurpose and sports courts which can be repurposed as medical facilities. And we are also looking at strengthening the resilience of key food distribution facilities such as the Jurong Fishery Port and Pasir Panjang Wholesale Centre against future emergencies and pandemics as raised by Mr. Zaqy Supat. The Singapore Food Agency is carrying out upgrades to enhance the security, surveillance and access control systems of our key food supply facilities. And this would allow for better contact tracing in the event of a future disease outbreak and support the enforcement of control measures. Businesses should also continue to review and keep their business continuity plans relevant to ensure supply resiliency at the company level. Even as we continue to enhance the adaptability of our infrastructure, we need to maintain strong partnerships across the people, the private, and the public sector. And this will be instrumental to enable us to meet demands for quarantine housing and temporary accommodations in the next pandemic. Let me take this opportunity to also address some of the matters relating to our workforce and workplaces during COVID-19, which were mentioned in some of the member speeches. One concern was on the necessity of the workforce vaccination measures of WVM, raised by Ms. Hazel Phua and Mr. Ip Hon Wing. At that time, the virus was mutating and new variants were highly transmissible, were emerging. And while time was needed to assess whether these new variants also put infected persons at a higher risk of severe disease. And this was when we were still grappling with Delta, by the way. So unvaccinated individuals, especially those who are older, would have put themselves at risk of infection at the workplace. And we were concerned that infected unvaccinated individuals could be at risk of severe illness. And there could also be significant added strain on our healthcare system. The government therefore decided that there was a need to put in place stronger measures at the workplaces to protect vulnerable and at-risk groups. And these measures complemented the public health measures in the community, such as the vaccination differentiated safe management measures. So in the advisory of COVID-19 vaccination at the workplace, the tripartite partners made it very clear that dismissal is a last resort and employers should try to allow unvaccinated workers to work from home, including through redeployment. Following the lifting of the workforce vaccination measures, WSG and NTUC's E2I had reached out to and offered employment assistance to such unvaccinated employees. Unvaccinated individuals can also approach WSG or E2I if they require further assistance. The lifting of the workforce vaccination measures followed the relaxation of the vaccination differentiated safe management measures in April 2022. With the full lifting of the vaccination differentiated safe management measures in October 2022, if an individual feels that an employer is making vaccination differentiated requirements without genuine occupational needs to do so, he or she may approach MOM or the Tripartite Alliance for Fair and Progressive Employment Practices or TAFEP for assistance. Since October 2022, there have only been a handful of complaints. For the broader workforce, a key lesson from the pandemic is developing a strong Singapore core and complementing it with a diverse foreign workforce to ensure the resilience of our business and our economy. This was a point that Mr. Zaqy Supat spoke about as well. And due to border restrictions during the pandemic, the total number of foreign workers fell from about 1.4 million in December 2019 to about 1.2 million in December 2021. However, the number has since recovered to pre-COVID levels as border restrictions were relaxed and employers tried to catch the upswing of the economic recovery. Even as we strengthen the complementarity of our foreign workforce and continue to attract global talent, international investments and companies, our focus on strengthening the Singapore core in our workforce will remain. We have developed industry transformation maps and job transformation maps, which include strategies to prepare our workers for higher value-added jobs in each sector. We have in place an ecosystem of programs and schemes to prepare workers for jobs of the future, such as the Career Conversion Programs and SG United Mid-Careers Pathways Program. We have also put in place various programs to increase the global and regional exposure of locals to enable them to take up leadership positions in global firms. So by combining and complementing local and foreign expertise, we can grow the pie for Singapore and provide more good opportunities for all. Mr. Speaker, I spoke earlier about how the SAF contributed to Singapore's fight against COVID-19 in the dormitories. At the same time, more than 7,000 SAF personnel were deployed across operations ranging from contact tracing, call center operations, logistical support, and medical operations. While our nation grappled and were fully focused on overcoming COVID-19, Singaporeans can be assured that the SAF kept our security operations and maintained a high level of operational readiness to keep us safe from external threats. Critical SAF operations such as maritime security, air defense, protection of key installations, and counterterrorism continued around the clock, even during the pandemic. Our servicemen had to train in challenging conditions arising from pandemic restrictions. These conditions tested the SAF's grit, tenacity, and resilience. But our people adapted quickly and quickly rose to the challenge. To minimize infection risks, SAF implemented strict health and safety measures, and these included vaccination, cohorting, safe distancing, reduction in training group sizes, and COVID-19 testing regimes. Some personnel performing critical operations had to isolate themselves in camps and bases for days to ensure that they were free from infection before they could start their duties. For many, this also meant sacrificing time away from their families and loved ones. This made celebrations like Mother's Day during the circuit breaker period slightly different for our servicewomen. Major Doris Sam, for example, an RSCF air warfare officer, was isolated in her base with her unit to ensure they were free from infection and could continue to safeguard Singapore's skies. This was the first time she was apart from her 2-year-old toddler, Atlas, over a prolonged period. Despite the sacrifices required, Doris, like many fellow sons and daughters of Singapore, stayed true to her mission and continued to defend our home. With the gradual easing of restrictions, the SAF progressively resumed training, often operating under conditions more strenuous than before the pandemic. At the height of the pandemic in 2020, the Singapore Navy participated in SAF's first overseas training since the onset of COVID-19, and this was for the Rim of the Pacific exercise, RIMPAC, a multinational naval exercise. The crew of the RSS Supreme embarked on one of their longest sails, 67 consecutive days, on board the ship traveling across the Pacific Ocean. No shore leave. Vaccines weren't available at the time, so they were in a COVID-safe bubble and had no interactions with anyone else apart from their fellow crewmates. The ship was reconfigured with ICU capabilities in the event that someone turned positive. Fortunately, the entire crew tested negative throughout the deployment and successfully completed the exercise. One of them was Weapons Systems Cluster Chief, ME3 Suresh Subramaniam, a father of 3, and ME Suresh told me that he was thankful for his wife's support and assurance on the home front. The SAF is grateful for the support from spouses and families of our servicemen and women who also shared the belief on the need to uphold high standards of training amidst COVID-19 in the defense of Singapore to ensure our sovereignty and our way of life. Throughout the COVID-19 pandemic, there were many groups who also kept Singapore going in different ways. One such group is our public transport workers, as mentioned by Mr. Melvin Yong earlier. They braved the virus every day to keep public transport services running. Some workers also volunteered to come back to work on their rest days to cover colleagues who were sick, especially when COVID-19 clusters were emerging among bus captains. Taxi drivers supported the conveyance of travellers on stay-home notice to their accommodation and COVID-19 positive patients to and from healthcare facilities. Employers too played their part. Public transport operators, SBS Transit, SMRT, Tower Transit Singapore, and Go Ahead Singapore adjusted shifts to ensure that their workers had sufficient rest while minimizing impact on commuters. At the height of the pandemic, platform operators and their workers also provided much-needed services, point-to-point transport, food, and goods delivery. The government had earlier accepted the recommendations by the Advisory Committee on Platform Workers to strengthen protections for platform workers, such as in areas of financial protection in case of work injury and for housing and retirement adequacy. So I echo Ms. Janet Ang and Mr. Melvin Yong's tribute and thank our public transport workers and operators, platform workers and operators, workers in the air and sea transport sector, and many others in our fight against COVID-19. This was a whole of society effort, one filled with sacrifice, dedication, and duty. Mr. Speaker, moving on to the Malay Muslim community. Our Malay Muslim community too played an important role in this national effort. The community had to adjust to the closure of mosques and suspension of congregational prayers, which Mr. Sharil Taha and Mr. Wan Rizal spoke about. While in circuit breaker, the community also had to observe Ramadan and Hari Raya away from their loved ones. With the month of Ramadan upon us in just 2 days' time, there is much to be grateful for, to be able to observe and pray together without COVID-19 restrictions. And I recognize that it has not been easy for the Malay Muslim community or the Muslim community in general, including our religious leaders, because of the sacrifices needed over the past 3 years to battle and to overcome COVID-19. So I thank our Malay Muslim community for making adjustments to their religious and cultural practices and staying united with fellow Singaporeans to keep our country safe. Speaker, I will deliver the next segment in Malay. Bagi sebahagian besar masyarakat Islam kita, tempoh pemutus rantaian jangkitan ataupun circuit breaker merupakan waktu yang amat mencabar. Kita tidak dapat mengerjakan amalan dan ibadah seperti solat Jumaat berjemaah. Kita juga terpaksa menggantung beberapa kegiatan lazim pada bulan Ramadan seperti solat tarawih di masjid. Namun, masyarakat kita tangkas menyesuaikan diri dengan menunaikan solat berjemaah di rumah bersama keluarga masing-masing. MUIS juga memperkenalkan bahan-bahan keagamaan dalam talian seperti Salam SGTV untuk membimbing masyarakat kita menjalankan kegiatan Ramadan di rumah. Demi mengekalkan tradisi, masyarakat kita juga menggunakan kaedah dalam talian untuk menyampaikan ucapan Hari Raya kepada keluarga dan sanak saudara. Pada tahun 2020 dan 2021, kita juga terpaksa menangguhkan ibadah haji bagi jemaah Singapura. Singapura merupakan antara negara yang pertama untuk berbuat demikian, sebelum negara-negara lain membuat keputusan yang serupa. Ini termasuk Arab Saudi yang mengumumkan bahawa ibadah haji dihadkan kepada jemaah domestik sahaja demi mengawal penularan COVID-19. Ramai yang berasa terkilan dengan keputusan itu, terutama sekali kerana tempoh menunggu yang sangat lama untuk mengerjakan ibadah haji. Namun masyarakat kita akur akan keperluannya kerana ia bukan sahaja melindungi kesihatan para jemaah tetapi juga kesihatan orang-orang di sekeliling mereka. Langkah-langkah ini tidak mungkin dapat dilaksanakan tanpa kepimpinan mufti dan jawatan kuasa fatwa, barisan pimpinan asatizah yang lain serta sokongan kuat daripada masyarakat. Para pemimpin agama kita bijak dalam menilai risiko kesihatan dan menyesuaikan amalan agama dengan keadaan semasa COVID-19. Keputusan sukar yang dibuat memerlukan keberanian dalam detik-detik genting agar dapat kita membendung penularan COVID-19. Kepimpinan agama kita meraih manfaat daripada kerjasama rapat dengan para karyawan penjagaan kesihatan menerusi kumpulan kerja Melayu Islam COVID-19. Kumpulan ini memberi nasihat kepada MUIS dalam membangunkan langkah-langkah keselamatan serta menerangkan sebab-sebab di sebaliknya daripada sudut saintifik kepada masyarakat umum. Contohnya Dr. Nur Hisham Main, Presiden Persatuan Karyawan Jagaan Kesihatan Islam ataupun MHPA bersama Mufti menerangkan mengapa penutupan masjid serta perubahan-perubahan lain kepada amalan beragama kita perlu dilakukan daripada sudut pandangan perubatan di sebuah rancangan temu bual interaktif dalam talian. Melalui penyesuaian dilakukan, masyarakat kita membuktikan bahawa kita adalah sebuah masyarakat progresif yang berupaya menyesuaikan kehidupan beragama tanpa bercanggah dengan rukun-rukun Islam. Saya bangga bahawa masyarakat kita telah dapat memainkan peranan yang berkesan melalui semangat kewarganegaraan yang dipaparkan semasa perjuangan kami membasmi COVID-19. Sumbangan sebegini memang penting, terutama dalam masyarakat kita yang berbilang budaya dan agama. Saya teruja bahawa sumbangan masyarakat kita turut diiktiraf di Persada Antarabangsa. Tahun lalu, jawatan kuasa fatwa yang dipimpin oleh Mufti menerima anugerah Imam Al-Qarafi oleh Sekretariat Agung bagi pihak berkuasa fatwa sedunia di bawah naungan Dar Al-Ifta di Mesir. Ini adalah atas kepimpinan dan sumbangan mereka dalam membimbing masyarakat semasa pandemik. Tapi ini bukan sahaja sebuah pengiktirafan bagi mufti dan jawatan kuasa fatwa, tetapi juga kepada masyarakat kita yang membuat penyesuaian yang baik apabila diperlukan. Saya turut berasa gembira kerana masyarakat kita masih menerapkan pengajaran yang diraih serta amalan-amalan yang baik daripada pandemik. Ini membina daya tahan kita yang akan membantu dalam menghadapi cabaran masa depan. Contohnya, 9 masjid tempatan masih menawarkan 2 sesi solat Jumaat. Pada mulanya, langkah ini diperkenalkan untuk menghuraikan masalah jumlah jemaah yang perlu dikurangkan. Tetapi ia kini memberi fleksibiliti kepada jemaah untuk memilih waktu yang sesuai bagi mereka menunaikan solat. Dalam beberapa hari lagi, masyarakat Islam akan menyambut bulan Ramadan. 3 tahun yang lalu, kita menjalankan ibadah puasa dalam tempoh pemutus rantaian jangkitan, circuit breaker. Sejak itu, banyak yang telah kita harungi bersama dan sedang kita kembali seperti sedia kala. Saya berharap terus melestarikan semangat gotong royong yang telah dijalinkan semasa pandemik agar dapat membina Singapura yang lebih bersatu padu dan berdaya tahan. Mr. Speaker, in PM Lee Hsien Loong's National broadcast on 7 June 2020, just as Singapore emerged from the circuit breaker, PM addressed Singaporeans that we face the crisis of a generation and also expressed his hope that an even stronger and better Singapore will emerge from the crisis. 3 years later, and on this side of the crisis, I believe that this holds true. We can be heartened by how our people have shown resilience, adaptability, and unity throughout the pandemic. I'm confident that the lessons we have learned will put us in good stead for the future and prepare us for the next crisis. In June 2020, at the start of the pandemic, I began my speech on the supplementary budget with a verse from a song by the legendary band Queen. And that verse was, "Your every day is full of sunshine, but in every life, a little rain must fall." Today, I'd like to close this chapter with another verse, this time from another legendary band, the Beatles. And it goes this way, and you can also imagine DPM Wong playing his guitar, strumming in the background. Little darling, it's been a long, cold, lonely winter. Little darling, it feels like years since it's been here. Here comes the sun. Here comes the sun, and I say, it's all right. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.